Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today's episode is going to be a $50 deck tech. When I say $50, I mean that is an overall deck cost. Both shipping and commanders that are $10 or less are going to be included in that cost, but basic lands will not be. Decks on this channel are built to be fun, inexpensive, and focused. If you want to learn more about what a focused commander deck is, check out this video here. On this deck tech, I'm going to take you through its strategy, the tactics, and how this deck wins. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCGplayer affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Will. Will has been supporting this channel for over a year now as a general tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without amazing patrons like Will. And for the personalized deck tech, Will chose Etrata the Silencer with a focus on abusing her ability as the win con without having to keep shuffling her back into the deck. Etrata is a 3/5 vampire assassin that costs 2 blue-black. She can't be blocked, and whenever she deals combat damage to a player, you exile target creature that player controls and put a hit counter on that card. That player loses the game if they own 3 or more exiled cards with hit counters on them. Etrata's owner shuffles it into their library. So the basic concept of the deck is this. We're going to get Etrata out, we're going to hit our opponents, and we're going to use various ways to make sure she's not shuffled back into our library. We're going to keep hitting our opponents, and we're going to win by getting 3 hit counters on each of them. As always, I'm going to take you through 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how we're going to win with it. So let's start things off with tactic number 1, Silence Please. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 and tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, we've got 3 mana rocks that each come into play tapped with Guardian Idol, Sky Diamond, and Charcoal Diamond. Guardian Idol can tap for a colorless, Sky Diamond taps for a blue, and Charcoal Diamond taps for a black. And Sphere of the Suns also comes into play tapped and can tap for any color 3 times. Next up, there's Star Compass, which comes into play tapped and can tap for any of our colors depending on our land situation. And then we've got our Signet with Dimir Signet, which we can pay 1 and 2 and tap for both of our colors. Next up, we've got Worn Power Stone, which costs 3, enters the battlefield tapped, but taps for colorless. And then Hedron Archive does the same thing, but comes into play untapped, costs 1 more, and we can pay 2 and tap and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. And finally, there's Firemind Vessel, which comes into play tapped and can tap to add 2 mana of different colors. We need to ramp efficiently, not only to get Etrata out the first time, but to make sure that she can stay out. So let's go over some ways to keep her on the battlefield in tactic number 2, Stay Put. First up, we've got Essence Flux and Siren's Ruse, which essentially do the exact same thing in this deck. They're going to blink Etrata. So essentially, after Etrata hits an opponent, exiles one of their creatures and gets a hit counter on it, we have to respond to that shuffle trigger. We cast one of these, and instead of shuffling her, we get her right back in play. And then Teferi's Time Twist is similar, but it exiles her and then brings her back at the beginning of the end step, and then puts a +1/+1 counter on her. Next up, we've got some spells that can blink multiple things with Ghostly Flicker, Displace, and Illusion Stratagem. Ghostly Flicker blinks 2 artifacts, creatures, and/or lands we control. Displace and Illusion Stratagem do the same thing, but just with creatures, and Illusion Stratagem is going to draw us a card. Next up, there's Voyager Staff, which we can pay 2 to sacrifice and blink Etrata. And then Reality Ripple is going to have her phase out. And then Release to the Wind says, exile target non-land permanent for as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may cast it without paying its mana cost. So essentially, we can recast Etrata for free whenever it's convenient to us. But there are plenty of times that we actually have to pay to recast her too. So now let's go over some more spells that prevent her from shuffling with tactic number 3, Come Back. First up, there's Unsummon, which just says, return target creature to its owner's hand. So with this and some of our other spells, we will have to recast Etrata from our hand, but that's definitely worth it compared to shuffling her or getting her from the command zone with some more commander attacks. And then String of Disappearances says, return target creature to its owner's hand, then that creature's controller may pay blue. If that player does, they may copy this spell and may choose a new target for that copy. Rescue is another 1 mana bounce spell, but it's just for us. It says, return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. And then Select for Inspection says, return target tapped creature to its owner's hand, scry 1. And then Seal Removal is essentially a bounce spell enchantment that we can just use whenever we need to. Next up, there's Snap, which is essentially free because it's going to bounce a creature and then untap up to 2 lands. But now it's time to go over some ways to get our opponents in on the fun in tactic number 4, Leave Together. First up, there's Curfew, which is going to force everyone to bounce a creature back to their hand. And then Peel from Reality says, return target creature you control and target creature you don't control to their owner's hands. Runaway Together is similar but different and says, choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players, return those creatures to their owner's hands. Next up, there's Tyrant Scorn, which says, choose 1, destroy target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less, and return target creature to its owner's hand. And then Into the Royal and Blink of an Eye do the exact same thing. They each say, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If this spell was kicked, draw a card. So these spells can be pretty flexible, and so can Aetherize. It says return all attacking creatures to the owner's hands. So we can use this defensively, but we can also just use it to bounce Etrata back to our hand. But now let's go over some repeatable ways to help us out in tactic number 5, back again. First up, there's Crystal Shard, which has pay a blue and tap it, return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1. So we can use this on Etrata or on one of our opponent's creatures as well. And then Portal of Sanctuary has pay 1 and tap it, return target creature you control on each aura attached to it to the owner's hands, activates ability only during your turn. Both of these are cheap and efficient, repeatable ways to get Etrata back into our hand. Next up, there's Nephalia Smuggler, which has pay 3 and a blue and tap it, exile another target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. And then Vidalian Illusionist has pay blue and tap it, target creature phases out. Vanishing might be our best one out of all these, though it just has blue, enchanted creature phases out. So all 3 of these are ways to keep Etrata on the battlefield without having to recast her. But we still have one more way to save Etrata from shuffling, so now it's time to go on to tactic number 6, Silent Footsteps. We're going to be running some ninjas with this deck, starting with Skull Snatcher and Mistblade Shinobi. The important part is that they each have ninjutsu for just 1 mana. Ninjutsu means that you return an unblocked attacker you control to your hand and then put this card onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Technically, even after Etrata has dealt combat damage, she's still attacking. So we can switch her out for one of the ninjas by ninjutsuing her back to our hand. So we're also running some more ninjas that have a slightly higher ninjutsu cost with Azure Smoke Shaper, Ninja the Deep Hours, and Ingenious Infiltrator. Now, all these have effects whenever they or another ninja hits, but again, the focus of this deck is Etrata hitting. If we happen to hit an opponent with one of these ninjas, great, but we really just want to focus on using them as bounce spells. But do keep in mind that if Etrata happens to have first strike, we do get that extra hit from the ninja too. But now it's time to go through some things that can help Etrata out in tactic number 7, Speed Kills. First up, we've got Ring of Valkus, Chariot of Victory, and Strider Harness, each of which are going to give Etrata haste. On top of that, Chariot of Victory is going to give her first strike and trample, and Strider Harness gives her +1/+1. All of these are equipment that are cheap to equip, which is crucial for this deck. We want to make sure that we can swing with Etrata each and every turn that we can, so giving her haste is huge. So we're also running Fleet Feather Sandals, which gives her flying and haste. And then we can tap Crashing Drawbridge, and creatures we control gain haste until end of turn. Again, when we bounce her back to our hand and then recast her, we need to make sure that we can swing with her right away. We need to get in 9 total hits with her, so every turn counts. But now let's move on to tactic number 8, Silent Study, where we're going to talk about ways to get to all these great cards. First up, there's Sign in Blood, which is going to make target player draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. And then Read the Bones is just for us. It's going to make us scry 2, draw 2, and then lose 2. Next up, there's Siphon Mine, which is going to make each other player discard a card, and then we draw a card for each card discarded this way. So most of the time, that's going to be 4 mana to draw 3 cards and make everyone else discard 1. And then Frantic Search says draw 2, discard 2, and untap up to 3 lands. So this is essentially a free way to dig through our deck. And then Careful Consideration is going to make us draw 4 and then discard 3, and if we cast this spell during our main phase, instead we draw 4 and discard 2. Next up, there's Read the Runes, which says draw X cards for each card drawn this way, discard a card unless you sacrifice a permanent. And then Factor Fiction says reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Epiphany the Drowned Yard is essentially an X version of Factor Fiction, but in reverse. Next up, we've got some enchantments that can help us out too with Monastery Siege and Kumena's Awakening. When Monastery Siege comes into play, we can choose Khans or Dragons. If we choose Khans, at the beginning of our draw step, we draw an additional card, then we discard a card. If we choose Dragons, spells our opponents cast that target us or permanent we control cost 2 more to cast. And then Kumena's Awakening has Ascend, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. If you have the City's Blessing instead, only you draw a card. But now it's time for us to move on to tactic number 9, Counterplay. First up, there's Negate, which says counter target non-creature spell. Next up, there's Counter Squall, which does the exact same thing, but the controller of that spell loses 2 life. And then Unsubstantiate says return target spell or creature to its owner's hand. So we can actually use this to bounce Etrata if we need to. But now let's go over some really valuable cards in this deck that can really help us finish our opponents off in tactic number 10, Resonating. First up, we've got 2 tutors with Diabolic Tutor and Tribute Mage. Diabolic Tutor says search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this can get us whatever we need no matter what the situation is. But Tribute Mage is much more specific. When she enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 2, reveal that card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And the card that we're going to be searching for most of the time is the Golden Pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Strionic Resonator. Strionic Resonator is an artifact that costs 2. We can pay 2 and tap it to copy target triggered ability we control, and we can choose new targets for the copy. This card works extremely well with Etrata. Essentially, instead of exiling 1 creature and getting 1 hit counter, we get 2 creatures and 2 hit counters. It is well worth that extra 2 mana to basically double up our kill clock on all of our opponents. This card makes taking out our opponents twice as easy, and that's why it's the Golden Pig. But now it's time for us to see how our deck stacks up when it comes to price. The average Etrata EDH rec deck will set you back $221.46. Our deck is going to be much more affordable, coming in at $49.91. And if you want to see the breakdown of this deck's cost, check out that link in the description. And now it's time for us to go over some reasonable upgrades. First up, let's add in Swiftfoot Boots by taking out Fleet Feather Sandals. Next up, let's add in Lightning Greaves by taking out Chariot of Victory. And then let's add in Cold Steel Heart by taking out Sphere of the Suns. Next up, let's add in Talisman of Dominance by taking out Guardian Idol. And then let's add in Spark Double by taking out Aetherize. Finally, let's add in Deadeye Navigator by taking out Nephalia Smuggler. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this deck tech are. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.